matches. It's an investigative programme, and we have to talk to as many people as possible from all sides of the story to try and give viewers a picture of what's going on. We're regulated by OFCOM. We have to be fair and balanced.
This is the second addendum to my recent analysis of what can perhaps best be described as Channel 4's hit piece on victims of a form of domestic abuse, commonly known as parental alienation. A current affairs documentary conveniently broadcast during the consultation period for the Home Office's draft statutory guidance for implementing the definition of domestic abuse that will ultimately be recognised by courts across England and Wales. And in this presentation, which I will be submitting to OFCOM in solidarity with the 550 plus Channel 4 viewers who felt strongly enough to complain to the UK's broadcasting regulator, I will attempt to succinctly summarise the top 5 reasons why it is, I believe, that this oh-so-serious current affairs programme about a very serious subject clearly transgressed Ofcom's broadcasting rules around due accuracy and impartiality and providing adequate protection for members of the public from harm and offence.
It happens to men too, you know.
Alright, gentlemen, let's do this.
Cool. Number 5. All those absent fathers.
So the programme has resulted from the many emails just telling me in kind of quite extreme terms, and this is men and women, more women but increasingly men, of the terrible times they've had in the family court.
Ofcom have confirmed that they received over 550 post-broadcast complaints broadly objecting to alleged gender bias and misrepresentation of fathers in family court disputes. A perspective that is perhaps particularly understandable when you take into account the 4 Court of Appeal cases featured in the documentary, because combined with 4 dramatic and emotive case studies, the narrative promoted by the programme makers was primarily built around a highly sympathetic hearing of 8 cases involving allegations of domestic violence against fathers from mothers engaged in private family law custody disputes. And even if we were to take everything presented in relation to the 4 case studies on total trust and as absolute truth, the fact that all 4 focused exclusively on the experience of mothers within the family court system would have been an immediate red flag for many watching.
This is about men and women, mothers and fathers. So to have an entire documentary that doesn't speak to a single father is... I'm just flabbergasted, but clearly they didn't want to do that because it would have detracted from the purity of the narrative that they were pushing.
Not least when you consider the fact that courts award mothers residential custody of an estranged couple's children in over 90% of cases. Fathers regularly report inequitable treatment by the family court system when it comes to custody or access to their children. Furthermore, many also report a culture where court orders to permit the husband visiting rights are routinely ignored with impunity by the mother. Indeed, even Channel 4's own survey of court user experiences found that fathers reported a higher level of dissatisfaction with court outcomes when compared to mothers. So Channel 4 had no problem getting fathers to participate in their survey, and according to presenter Louise Tickle, the programme was quite literally inspired by the many emails from people of both sexes, personally contacting her to talk in quite extreme terms about the terrible times they'd had in family courts. So a question for Ofcom is, where on earth did all those fathers go?
If we were to use the narrative of things being rare, what all Channel 4 have actually promoted is that apparently these fathers are rare. They couldn't find any.
Number 4. Alienating the alienated. In my humble subjective opinion, it is in fact the programme makers' approach to the issue of parental alienation that especially exposes quite how unethical, unbalanced, unscrupulous and downright directly discriminatory their approach may have been. Directly because not one male, or for that matter female, victim of parental alienation was apparently featured in the show. And given the number of complaints and mounting evidence concerning accuracy and impartiality, it would be quite extraordinary if they fail to fully investigate what appear to be some rather obvious transgressions in Section 5. And it is those victims of parental alienation that Channel 4 have failed most obviously, by providing self-identifying ideologues with an unchallenged opportunity to essentially deny them, and worse still, imply that male victims particularly are most likely perpetrators in disguise.
It exists in the DSM, diagnostic specific mental disorders or whatever. It exists in case law. It's the elephant in the room. Because I always say, if you make an application in the court just to see your children, you're already a victim of parental alienation.
I think this is probably a case of semantics.
Okay.
So I think we've chosen the common term of parental alienation so that everybody knows we're all talking about the context of children, the extreme extent who are manipulated or influenced to reject a parent, and that relationship isn't supported. My training, additional training, was with the Overcoming Barriers clinical protocol. It has the largest data set internationally for research and evidence base. And I prefer personally to use resist, refuse. If you read into the history of parental alienation, there's examples of it all the way back through history. It is just a concept of how people deal with transitions. And changes. I mean, in my more broader reading, the Standalone charity has done some excellent academic research on adult estrangement, which has influenced government policy, and 54% of estranged adults come from a family that has a pattern of emotional cut-off or estrangement. So a lot of what my training is and what we can see in these families is there is a context or some form of family pattern or intergenerational history of a failure to deal with conflict and or emotional cut-off.
When people object to parental alienation, they object to Gardner, who was the original proponent of it. And he does sound frankly insane, but he is not ever cited or relied upon in British courts. He's just not relevant. We look at the behaviour. It just so happens that the behaviour has now got a label attached to it called parental alienation. Some people object because of its origins. I don't want to waste time saying, well, is it a syndrome? Is it, a mental illness? What are the criteria for diagnosis? No. Just, is there a parent who's being denied a relationship with a child? Is there any reason offered for that denial? Right, well, we've got a problem and we need to fix it. So whatever you want to call it, I don't really care.
Number 3, false allegations do and don't exist. A key concern promoted by dispatches was that fathers in family courts are increasingly lodging false claims about a form of domestic abuse that they also argue is so rare that it may as well not exist, namely parental alienation. And another obvious side to that same token is the significantly less than rarely spoken about concern that false allegations concerning all forms of domestic abuse are practically actively encouraged by the qualification criteria for legal aid. Another highly significant side of the story that Dispatch is entirely ignored. A good question to ask would be, in the court system, I mean, the allegation was essentially that some fathers will use allegations of parental alienation to whether it's kind of get back at the mother or to continue abusing. I mean, would you accept that there are false allegations of parental alienation?
Yes.
Yeah. Which,
Oh, absolutely. And there's false denials of domestic violence as well.
Yeah. And that, because to me, that's
a very important point here.
Yeah, go on ahead.
The only one that's extensively government funded is the false allegations by the women against the men.
Yeah.
That is the problem here.
Absolutely. Because to me, that question is sort of, the dogs in the street or the children in the playground.
That's right.
would know that human nature is such that if you're going to, kind of game a system, so obviously, it's possible that kind of, both sexes will, throw out allegations.
Yeah.
But the very fact that, essentially the narrative was there's really no such thing as false allegations unless...
Oh, that's absolutely, that's...
Unless they're parental alienation allegations made
only
by
then
men.
is that a false allegation. And don't forget, once again, none of these have been before a criminal court.
Yeah.
They're just in a family court, balance of probabilities. But they don't even want a balance of probabilities test for their preferred candidates. They want no testing of the evidence from the mother.
It's simply, if the allegation's made...
That's right, the allegation's made, that's it. Yeah, the fact that she's made it is the fact. The fact that the father denies it is proof that he's guilty.
Number 2, define the difference between an extremist and an expert witness. The coordinator of the Court Said campaign, Natalie Page, who was given the last word in the documentary, was also apparently heavily involved in its making, helping researchers to source the mothers featured in the emotive and compelling case studies. Her involvement and Channel 4's uncritical championing of her campaign and its key messages is just one potential example of how the programme makers may have breached OFCOM's rules around impartiality and accuracy. To understand just how heavily Channel 4 and Candor Productions leaned into the directly sex discriminatory believe all women, suspect all men narrative, consider this quite remarkable observation from the chair of Central and North London branches of Families Need Fathers.
They showed in dispatches a video that had been filmed by the Court Said people at Parliament Square. I know because I was there. The headline speakers were among the most renowned child abusers in the UK, as found in court.
Okay,
criminal and civil courts.
Do you want to expand on that aspect?
Well, 2 of the principal speakers at that event were Victoria Hay and Samantha Baldwin. And they, if you Google them, have been found guilty of horrific child abuse. Simple as that. Drugging children, etc. This was part of Channel 4 Dispatches documentary, as if they had filmed it. As if the Court Said was respectable professionals with impartial professionalism.
There is absolutely no child protection in the UK. Only child trafficking, child abusing paedophile rings, running amok in every town and city in the UK. The secret family court has passed its sell-by date and is way past reform. The court needs closing and the judges need to be deposed.
The glass blind spots can confirm that Victoria Haig and Samantha Baldwin both spoke at the event in Parliament Square, and that they have been found guilty of child abuse in UK courts.
So they're coming in, they're giving this so-called expert advice around parental alienation, and I say so-called because we've looked into some of these experts and they have very vague titles, they're not affiliated to any regulatory body, and that concerns me.
The London Victims Commissioner appeared in the programme to question the credibility and accountability of expert witnesses on parental alienation that appear before the courts. And post-broadcast, she also appeared to dismiss victims of parental alienation on social media and accuse them of promulgating extremist and hardline beliefs. Which all seems a bit rich under the circumstances, especially when you consider this explanation as to why Channel 4 were unable to get a parental alienation expert witness to appear on the show.
One of the problems and the reasons that they could not get expert witnesses to speak on this matter is due to the trolling. There's a number of websites being set up. As a colleague alerted me, and it was through the Court Said, where he was being trolled on Twitter, trying to identify cases where he had been the expert on to undermine his work. And then, having spoken to other guardians even, I'm aware that solicitors in NIAS have been targeted, and I became aware of 2 other psychologists who have had websites set up criticising their work.
Wow.
So there's a great personal and professional risk in doing this work. And it isn't about unaccredited experts as portrayed by Claire Waxman. It's actually about experts who, if they give the opinion that one of the parents doesn't like, they actually risk, the personal and professional trolling websites, numerous complaints.
They did, of course, appear to have very little difficulty securing expert witness after expert witness that, as one viewer observed, were prepared to promote the narrative that the family courts are a misogynistic tool of oppression and that they give children to violent men. And anyone paying close attention may also have noticed that the female-led and overwhelmingly female production team behind the programme relied heavily on the testimony of a number of high-profile professionals who are very publicly aligned with the feminist political perspective. High-profile professionals like Dr. Adrienne Barnett, who, among other things, is the author of the aforementioned Harms Report literature review and a lecturer in research methods with a focus on feminist theory and research methodology. Here's a clip of her explaining her approach.
Feminist research not only produces knowledge, but it has to be useful knowledge, and that is key to it. And in this way, it's often termed as a dual responsibility. A dual interconnected responsibility, because of course, as we know, knowledge and power are very much bound up. As I'm sure you're all aware, the basis of constructivism is that social reality is not rooted in objective fact, but is constituted, created, constructed. And so our data in research, we don't go out there and collect data, we're creating data. Say what?
And if all that isn't bad enough for Ofcom to fully investigate and take action, I'd propose that arguably the most breathtaking example of Channel 4 deliberately misleading their audience, one that is quite possibly also the most serious, is the highly dubious but altogether dramatic dramatisation that sets the scene for the entire rest of the show. I am, of course, referring to that midnight intervention.
They dragged them out of their bedrooms, kicking and screaming.
Why can't you come with us? Because the police officers say I can't, sweet. It's the court that say that you can't. It's definitely not our decision.
What struck me as really bad was the fact that we did not know and were not told what bits were filmed, what bits were acted. I thought that was really poorly done, given it was such an emotive topic, and people screaming and children being removed at midnight. And of course, I've been doing this job for 20 years now. Children don't get removed at midnight unless they're at imminent risk of death. I mean, I don't know what happened in that case, but it is certainly nothing I have ever experienced in 20 years.
You're gonna have to let Mum go now.
No! And I can still hear that scream.
The whole premise of the documentary was flawed. It was to give this impression that, women who dare speak up about violence, that's it, their children are taken from them at midnight. Absolute nonsense.
Sarah's testimony echoes questions highlighted in part 1 from Lucy Reid, family lawyer and the chair of the Transparency Project, concerning the accuracy of the claims relating to the dramatic footage of the midnight police removal that dispatches place so much emphasis upon. The footage is upsetting and emotive, and it's hard to think past it. But it is very likely that this order was being executed on the orders of the High Court, which in itself tells us that matters had reached a particular crunch point, and that the mother was thought unlikely to cooperate with an order without police enforcement, or that she had already refused or failed to cooperate with such an order. Although the removal was presented as if it were out of the blue, there is likely to have been a very long run-up to this removal. Almost certainly findings against the mother of some sort, attempts to get her to comply with less draconian orders, and ultimately this. The court will have weighed up the risks and benefits of taking this course of action, considered whether there was a less draconian way of achieving the desired result, and will almost certainly have delivered a reasoned judgment. And our third expert witness very much also questions the accuracy and impartiality involved in the manner in which that police removal was portrayed.
For 4 years, I was a reunification family working on cases regarding child contact matters in private family law. And I have performed transfers of residence, so I have reunified 20 children over 4 years. Okay. And I would just like to say that following the clinical literature, doing the work properly, that all of these children have settled, and the main outcome of these interventions is to ensure, in the best interest of the children, they have a relationship with both parents. That's my absolute bias, if I have one. A lot of the time when I've been instructed to do a transfer of residence, I have had no input at all with the case. I'm purely there to have provided a therapeutically supported transfer of residence to help the child with that move and to help them settle and to help put a family structure in place for some ongoing work for the reintroduction back of contact. I have never seen or had a case where contact generally contact's been stopped for a minimum of 2 years, sometimes 3.5, 4 years. To have had 1, 2 expert reports, to have had 1 or 2 interventions prior. And as per the clinical literature, it is always the intervention of last resort. I mean, the court has literally tried everything. I think what's misrepresented in the programme is it says, I think Dr. Barnett says there's just no research to say that these work. And I would refute that. The key article, Templar et al. 2016, did a meta-review of all of the research on interventions and condensed it down to the 4 or 5, I think, key elements of what should be present. And the key outcome was, for severe parental alienation, the only clinical intervention that was proven to work for the children was the short-term discomfort of a transfer for the long-term gains and benefits. Now, that article informs the CAFCAS Child Impact Assessment Framework on the intervention section. And there are masses through the Association of Family Conciliation Courts, within the literature, within the clinical literature, within the attachment literature, there is evidence of how these family dynamics, how transfers of residence, the harm that's caused, and how you help the children move to a healthier place. We will go to extreme lengths to try and negotiate the easiest and most compassionate way to move the children that causes the least harm and distress. And again, it would only be in a case where that has not been achieved or a collection has been completely blocked that you would need to then, for the court to make an application to the TIP staff, who would then normally delegate to the police to carry out one of those orders. There's plenty of notice, the judgment comes out, there's negotiation, the mother would have known it was planned, it's all pre-planned, pre-informed. Yeah. You know, it gave the impression that any transfer of residence occurs like that. Is just not the case. Yeah. That's complete misrepresentation.
We don't go out there and collect data, we're creating data.
It's a dispatches, it's an investigative programme, and we have to talk to as many people as possible from all sides of the story to try and give viewers a picture of what's going on.
How you can produce something like that and not speak to a single father, it's just incredible.
We're regulated by OFCOM, we have to be fair and balanced.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.
The Glass Blind Spot is brought to you by you, because it's your views, your likes and your comments that keep this show on the road.